and welcome to the Biodiversity and Greenroofs panel for the virtual summit, Green Roofs and Walls of the World. We've got a great lineup today of experts in the field of biodiversity and urban ecology, and we'll be talking about various aspects of this topic. To start off, my name is Christine. I'll be moderating the session, and I'd like first to introduce our panel. Our first speaker is Nathalie Baumann. She's a biogeographer, social anthropologist, who did her Masters of Science at the University of Basel in Switzerland. She's worked on a variety of projects with NGOs, like World Wildlife Fund Switzerland, in the context of river ecology, biodiversity assessment, urban ecology, and the ecology of ground nesting birds. Since 2005, Nathalie is a research associate with Dr. Stefan Brenneisen at the Greenroof Competence Center at the Institute of Environment and Natural Resources of the Zurich Applied University in Wädenswil. One of her main research topics is ecological compensation of roofs, vegetation, and ground nesting birds. So in this capacity, she's been looking at investigating the success of broods and thereby improving green roof design for this purpose. Nathalie will be our first speaker. I'd like to introduce Gary Grant. He is an independent ecologist with 30 years of experience in ecological survey and assessment, habitat creation and restoration, green infrastructure planning, and site design and management. Gary works closely with built environment professionals, encouraging them to use the ecosystem services approach. Gary began work with the London Wildlife Trust in the 1980s and moved into consultancy in 1989, designing his first green roof in 1992. He wrote the book Greenroofs and Facades, published by HISBRE Press in 2006. Until 2009, Gary was a director at AECOM Design and Planning, working on large-scale planning projects like the London 2012 Olympic Park, amongst many others. Gary's current emphasis is on green infrastructure planning and climate change adaptation projects, as well as the design of building integrated vegetation in the form of green roofs and living walls. Also on the panel is Dusty Gedge, green roof campaigner supreme and designer, who has actively promoted green roofs in the UK since 1997. Dusty has designed a number of seminal roofs and helped develop the London Green Roof policy. Dusty is the current president of the European Federation of Green Roof Associations, established 3 PhD projects on green roof research, and has a particular interest in biodiversity on green roofs. He's also a writer, blogger, and sometimes TV presenter. Dusty is a co-author of Small Green Roofs, published 2011 by Timber Press, among other publications. In 2004, Dusty co-founded livingroofs.org, a non-profit organization established to promote, advise upon, and seek research into green roofs and similar structures within the context of urban and rural regeneration. Dusty?
Okay, yeah, and of course it's my honour to actually give you Christine's biog too. Christine Thuring has been working with Green Roofs since 2001 in various capacities, including installation, research, consulting, design and education. She's been a contributing editor at Greenroofs.com since 2004, and prior to Green Roofs, Christine worked in field botany and restoration ecology. Her work developing native plant lists for green roofs and walls in the Pacific Northwest restored her passion for ecology, and she's currently doing her PhD in landscape ecology at the University of Sheffield. And Christine co-founded Greenroofs Safari and offers consulting, technical translation through Chlorophyllosity. I might have said that wrong, Christine.
Very good. Chlorophyllosity. Thanks, Dusty. So this is our panel. Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us. I guess Nathalie will be our first speaker. Nathalie.
Yes, thank you, Christine, and I also welcome you all to that panel and welcome you to Switzerland. Well, as Christine introduced me, I'm working since 2005 about ground nesting birds on green roofs, and the idea was to find out, because there were no data about how successful ground nesting birds could be in their breeds on green roofs. So we were funded by the Swiss national government, and this project lasted until 2009. and we had about 7 green roof sites where we found out that the ground nesting birds are nesting. And most of these roofs were just simply gravel roofs or just light green roofs with the pumice or sedum roofs or moss roofs, something like that. So this is the kind of roofs these ground nesting birds did choose. And the first year it was really my research topic or purpose was to find out, can the chicks survive over there? In Switzerland we have different kind of ground nesting birds breeding. Besides the northern lapwing, there are the little oh, Dusty, help me. Le petit gravelot. How do you say that in English?
Plover, little ring plover.
Yeah, ring plover. Yeah, or
the little ring plover.
Yeah, this. Yeah, thank you. So on these 7 sites, I could find just the northern lapwings, Vanellus vanellus, who breeded there in different ways, like sometimes one couple or sometimes 3 or 4 pairs breeding. And in the first year I could just really find out that the chicks don't have any chance to survive, because the strategy of this species is when they hatch they have to find at this first moment the food themselves. So it was really hard because there were no insects, no larvae, no worms on that roof, because it was either not screened or it was really bad or badly greened. So for the next year, for us it was clear to improve these roofs in order to find out if when we improve it we can maybe help them to have successful breeds. So in Switzerland we just our purpose is to design roofs like just bringing back what you take away when you just build on the ground. So it's bringing back landscapes on the roof. So that means several different substrate types, different heights of substrates, just really design landscape. And so we just try to design and improve it with taking in consideration the habitat of northern lapwings they would have normally or naturally. And in that way we just put some more substrates that they could have, that we can let grow a meadow in order to get more insects, and of course then there would be more biomass and food for the chicks. So after 3 years we had the first success and the first breeds who fledged, and since then, that means since 2008, we have about every year between 1 to 4 chicks fledging on different sites. And this is really because we could improve it. We did small improvements, but that really showed to bringing up more substrate, organic substrate with different with thin pore, with thin material, with some organic material. We could also quickly improve the vegetation, and then we have the, of course, the food chain logic. As soon you got flowers, and the real good flowers, endemic and indigenous flowers, you will get the insects, and then they will start their life cycle too on the roof. So it was really, on the one hand, easy to show it now, but it's still getting on this research on a small scale, and we still go on to try to make better condition for these ground nesting birds, because every time is different because of the weather, of the climate change, whatever. So we have to try to handle this and to find always new solutions if for example the spring is really bad. So maybe just to explain, Switzerland was the country which started to have a purpose or look at the green roofs like this could be a biodiversity or biodiverse habitat. And I'm sure, as I know Gary Grant, who did a long time before that kind of work. I don't want to say that in this way, but it was like we could just push that on on laws to change things, to say this could be a compensating surface, like ecological compensation surface. So we just put that purpose on it, and Dr. Stefan Brenneisen showed that with his PhD and studies, that when you just build up a green roof and you just put different substrates, organic substrate mixing up with mineral substrate, for example, is fine too. And having this in different heights, like really building up and designing landscape, you can really improve this habitat for many insect species, for spiders too, and also for birds, in order to find food, in order to find material to do the nest, and of course for ground nesting birds. So, and most of the time also we find red list species, really endangered species, who just really have this habitat as a survival habitat because they can't find anything in urban space anymore.
Thanks, Nathalie. Anyone with specific questions to Nathalie?
Yeah. So essentially, what you did in Switzerland is go away from sort of normal commercial products and try to actually get the green roofs designed specifically for biodiversity.
Yes, that's correct. That's absolutely correct, yeah. Our thing is to have natural substrate, to say also we have to find the material in the region nearby where you just build up a roof or a house, whatever. So it's also like the ecological chain, you know, ecological balance, whatever, is to find that kind of substrate, and of course taking seeds, plant materials, indigenous, special for roofs, etc. So it's really the holistic perspective concerning the ecology is really within our designing green roofs.
And if I may, Christine, can I add just a sort of to draw out, because I think it's a very important point. I mean, I always celebrate the fact that in building code in Basel it says all green roofs should be designed for rare spiders and beetles, and so it's actually policy that has helped drive the kind of installation of better green roofs.
Yeah, that's right. That's, well, in the beginning it was really like that, but you have to be careful, because putting a law on it is just one thing. It helps you very well and very much, you know, because then the firms or the companies just start business because they realize, okay, we have to do that, so it's fine. But the quality was then the problem, you know, because you have different and several ways to green a roof, and in fact, because there is a big business or industry or market in Europe with the mineral substrate with systems, so we had to find out how we can put also quality on it. So we started again like a campaign where we just had regulations and recommendations, and in Basel we have really a good opportunity where from a certain surface size on, like 1,000 square meters, they have to contact us, and we have to help them and to give them some ideas how they could screen the roof. So it gives us also good opportunities to have new research fields, because there are several and many roofs, there are more than 1,000 square meters. So this is, but then we can also help Basel as a city to really improve and have good green roofs. This is really one focus. We still try to work on that and to push that.
I was just saying, Christine, that I'm very pleased to see that biodiversity is at the heart of everything that's done on green roofs in Switzerland.
Yeah, it's amazing that a little bit of
Can I have one more
research
point,
is
Christine,
really what kind of placed that legislation into place. That it was, I guess it was originally Stefan Brenneisen's doctor PhD work that found the true potential for rare and even endangered species on green roofs, and just how that proceeded to get to the right people and to be put into law, that those kinds of species need to be given that habitat.
Can I make one more point, Christine? Yeah, I mean, I think it's very interesting, and it relates probably to all of our conversations. This is what what's happened in Switzerland is about a process approach, not a product approach, where most green roofs are actually all about, I go and buy a product. And one of the issues we've had in the UK is companies saying like, oh, we've made a product to deliver biodiversity, or this is the product that delivers biodiversity. We need to maintain this process approach that you design specifically. You just don't buy an off-the-shelf solution.
Very good point.
Absolutely, yeah. I agree too, yeah.
Natural products versus natural processes, two very different things. And actually that's a really nice segue into my talk, because I'm currently doing my PhD research at the University of Sheffield under the supervisorship of Dr. Nigel Dennett. And this is actually part of an EU Marie Curie industry-academia partnership, which grants me a certain period of time with our industry partner in Germany. And so an interesting branch has developed off of the original research plan, namely that our industry partner, which is Zinco, they've developed, I guess, green roof systems since day one, and are actually quite interested to see how they've developed with time. So I've been doing vegetation surveys of old green roofs in the Stuttgart area, and some of these systems would have been prototypic at their time. So this has allowed me to investigate a bit deeper the actual ecological processes that happen on green roofs, and I'm going to talk about those a bit today. So one thing that probably everyone has observed is that in inaccessible sites where biotic forces can persist undisturbed, we can really perceive the interconnectedness of life, the processes that nature manages on her own. So this is just a gravel roof in Vancouver, which, you know, maybe 10 years ago was just the gravel you see in the forefront, and this very thick layer of moss has developed over time. Obviously, Vancouver's got a huge moss kind of flora, but you can see that off of the moss develops grass, and so this is the interconnected life that I'm implying to, just how life just takes form and establishes. It has no influence by, no direct impact from humans. So I'm studying, I'm doing my PhD in landscape ecology, which is kind of how landscapes and the different players within our landscapes are connected with each other. And with my background in plant ecology and restoration ecology as well, I'm interested in plant communities. So I'm going to give you a quick intro into phytosociology, which is the study of plant associations or plant communities, because this is kind of the crux of this research that I'm working on. Just in brief, phyto means plant, sociology means community. So plant sociology, the science of this involves the sampling and identification of vegetation, both species and community associations. The classification is according to core species. Usually there's a minimum of 5 core species that define a certain association. Now the field of phytosociology was established in the late 19th century by European ecologists. So there's an example of a polygala in a quadrat, which is the big tool for plant community classification. So the methods basically determine quantitative measures. You want your frequency of species, you'd like your abundance in terms of percent cover, productivity by biomass is helpful, and observations like vigor. Obviously the sampling design will depend on your gradients, the homogeneity of your vegetation, and so on. I'm not going to get into this too deep, but I'd like to show you some of the roofs I've been looking at. So this is the Roman Museum in Kungen. This is 24 years old. You can see it's got quite a slope to it, including a north and a south-facing aspect. The Fachhochschule Nürtingen is 24 years old. This is a beautiful wildflower meadow with orchids. Can you see the orchid in the bottom right? This roof actually was just renovated this last year, so it's actually the orchids. Gesundheit. The orchids have been removed.
Merci.
So I guess I got there right in time. Pliensau Friedhof, Esslingen, 33 years old, sedum roof. Surprising soil development on this roof, which is something we might speak to later. Getzereihof in Tübingen is 25 years old. This was one of the first sloped roofs of its kind, and you can see a very distinct north-south gradient. So the plant's growing on the south face, which is on the, well, I can't say left or right because I'm not sure how you're looking at the screen, but you can see the difference between the two different aspects, yeah? The Stuttgart-Kielesberg roof, 20 years old, also very distinct north-south gradient, and including some daylilies, which appeared out of nowhere. Verkehrsbetriebe Esslingen, this is 24 years old. This is with the old school lava substrate and even some styrofoam modules that are packed in kind of quadratic shapes. But very distinct communities have developed here. You can almost see them between the light shafts, for example. And then the Stuttgart Rathaus, this is 20 years old. This beautiful allium flavum. So the question, this particular question is, what are the key factors to species-rich green roofs, given that biodiversity is such an interesting thing? And as Nathalie mentioned, the more flowers you have, the more insects you have. So it's also that trophic chain that we're interested in. We're not interested in just plants, we're interested in birds and megafauna, if you like. So how do these factors compare to the same factors which define natural ecosystems, which are also species-rich? Well, as far as phytosociology goes, backtracking again to the 1950s, when this school of phytosociology first established, the pioneering plant ecologists who basically set off into the world to attempt to define plant communities, they also noticed the spontaneously vegetated green roofs of especially Germany. It was a popular roof construction of back in the day. And Gary might actually speak briefly to these as well, because they're quite fascinating. But these were called tar paper gravel roofs, or Holzzementdach, and they were actually widespread across 19th century Germany. It was a very simple construction, just depending on the area, but there were standards and specifications. For Berlin, for example, it was 5 centimeters sand, 5 centimeters gravel. It was not planted. So the plants that have established in the last 120 years are truly spontaneous colonizers, pioneer communities, if you like. So those early pioneering plant sociologists defined two distinct plant communities of these spontaneous green roofs. One was the Scleranthatea, and the other was the Poetum and Keptis compressae. And I should say hundreds of communities were defined overall, but these are the two kind of possibly unique to green roofs. I'll just take you through those. Scleranthatea is a naturally occurring community of dry meadows and sandy soils. It's heavily dependent on annual precipitation, and it's usually two-layered, which means there's low-growing herbs, thin-leaved grasses, and bryophytes. Sound like what you see on a green roof? Similar. And then there's the Poetum and Keptis compressae, which is the typical Poa meadow, and this was the most widespread on these tar paper gravel roofs. It depended largely on the soil depth. For the soils that were greater than 10 centimeter, you could have closed swards of Poa compressa, which is kind of a pioneering plant. Soils less than 10 centimeters, you get a looser cover with more rudderals, and but still just the Poa interspersed within. So to the preliminary findings, a typical Poa meadow occurs on old green roofs. We know this. I found this on my roofs as well, although not in the same way that you'd see on a Holzzementdach, because it's obviously a different system. Preliminary findings from my research definitely suggest that soil formation occurs over time, and I've got some background literature to support this as well, so it's quite interesting. Species richness is affected by many factors, and the statistics may tweeze these out. And of course, substrate depth and grass dominance will affect species richness as well, and that's common to any natural plant community. This is just an example of the soil formation that occurs with time. This is from that sedum roof, the Pliensau Friedhof, which is 33 years old. Originally it would have been like a lava-based substrate, and in the meantime a proper black earth has developed with humus, and I don't know where the worm came from, but it ended up in one of my soil cores. So So some basic conclusions is no single factor is key to plant community develop, but obviously a variety of factors in combination. And this applies to soil formation as well. There's been work that found that old roofs definitely have soil formation, but that the factors influencing these are all very, very different. And the roofs themselves differ very much, unlike young roofs, which are actually quite similar in terms of their soil. So some of these factors include obviously the roof age, substrate depth, accessibility, maintenance regimes, moisture, shade, slope aspect, history of the roof, and so on.
Well, Richard, most of the roofs that you were looking at all have the same sort of topography. They're all about the same depth. Not one roof has the same sort of depth. And I think that sort of relates, that's interesting because they're older, so all roofs would have been laid at 100 mil, 4 inches or 6 inches. Would you say that most of your study roofs, that roof itself has the same depth?
Yeah. Overall, they are quite similar. Thanks for asking, Dusty. Substrate depth, they're all extensive, so they're all relatively similar.
Yeah.
Some of them are pitched, some of them are flat, some of them are sedum, some of them are seeded. Some of them started off as sedum blankets and were gradually replaced.
Yeah.
So they're all actually quite different. So I'll have to see. I'm not exactly sure how the comparison will turn out, but we'll probably...
Yeah, I was relating to what's interesting when most people put a green roof down in the old days, it would have had the same depth. And what's interesting from the work in Switzerland is about varying the topography. Is actually you can actually increase diversity by varying topography.
Yeah, actually that's a great point, because on these old roofs, you actually find a lot of topography from the ants, from these pioneering ants. That it's unbelievable. Like the I'm pretty sure that you could attribute a lot of the diversity on, say, that orchid meadow. They had very distinct hillocks. Same with the the sedum roof, the Plinsau Friedhof, with the earthworms. So the effects of ants and other soil fauna, in effect, create further processes. So it seems very much to be a very cyclic effect, where as soon as one thing starts to happen, more things start to happen off of it. So in effect, even though it might have started out as a level, flat substrate, the colonizers that came in, like ants, created deeper depths, and out of that the plants responded, and then out of that the organic matter responded, and yeah, so it's kind of cyclic. Yes, do it.
I'm very cautious about this, and don't. Yeah. More flowers, you have more insects. I would challenge that statement, because actually what's interesting about the work in Switzerland is areas of bareness actually are inhabited by certain insects and bugs that actually like it bare and don't need flowers. So we have to be careful that just saying more flowers means more biodiversity that lives where there's little flowers.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks for pointing that out, Dusty.
Yeah, I was about to say that ant hills are a feature which gets removed from grassland by mowing and machinery. So here we have potentially a very important conservation message, that by having these unmanaged grasslands, we can promote the anthill ecology which you described. So that's a very interesting lesson.
That's funny. Lessons from the roof for
very, very interesting.
For ground level. Yeah, interesting.
Well, I've got one final point.
Please do, go, Dusty.
More people should be going and studying old roofs rather than studying new roofs. And I think your research is very, very interesting, looking at roofs built 20 or 10 years ago.
Yeah, you know, one of the big challenges to studying old roofs is you need to have accessibility, which usually means you need to have good contacts. And that's one thing that the industry partnership that my research is funded by has permitted. Not only having kind people there to allow me and help me onto the roof, but people who are genuinely interested as well. They want to know what's happening as well. So there are some really basic challenges to doing this kind of work, which, yeah, that's probably why more people don't do it. Accessibility. But it's really nice.
I think
I would wish it upon anyone.
Accessibility is always a problem on any kind of roof, or a new one or an old one. That will be always a problem. But I think you are correct. You're right. That is really to point that out. And I think your PhD study is really interesting also for us, because considering the plants association and soil processes about which we don't really know a lot, so that will be really helpful to have then later on your results to go on with this. So it's really a good work you're doing. Thank you.
Thanks. So we should definitely keep in touch so we can.
I think also it's also that
keep the links connected.
Yeah, definitely.
I think a lot of the audience will be from North America. I think it'd be good if people in North America go and look at some of the roofs which may be 10 years old and 12 years old, rather than looking at new roofs, looking at old roofs which have been established in North America.
That's a great idea too. Yeah. Seeing is believing. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Doing is believing too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Nicely put. Thanks, Gary. Doing is believing. Seeing is believing. Doing is believing. Yep. Speaking of doing is believing, shall we move on to Gary Grant, who has so much more experience? And did I read correctly? Gary designed his first green roof in 1992, and it was a green roof for biodiversity as well. Oh, Gary, please tell us about it.
Yeah, please.
Okay. I'll turn away from this picture of men in suits on a roof. It looks like Wall Street 1929, doesn't it?
Crazy, isn't it?
On the roof.
I'll begin with the first green roof project, which was there were several roofs which were on buildings designed by the architect's archetype in the early 1990s. They're a firm of ecological architects, if you like, and so they were very open-minded. I was very naive. I didn't know anything about green roofs at all. All I knew was that they did exist, and I'd seen pictures of Nordic, Scandinavian green roofs. So really I was mimicking that, but being an ecologist, I was interested in somehow creating high biodiversity. So what we did was to put turf on these roofs, but put it upside down, and then seed it with a native wildflower mix, and then plant with a small number of wildflowers to give it some immediate interest. So that's what we did, and subsequent surveys undertaken of several green roofs in London about 5 years ago, published on the Urban Habitats website, show that this is the most biodiverse green roof in London. Of course, it has the advantage that it's also one of the older green roofs that was designed for biodiversity. So at least we can demonstrate that we were on the right track, even if we were naive and we had no previous experience or no research to rely on. But I would also say that sometimes we just have to do something and take a chance. It's not as if it was a huge risk. We knew that vegetation eventually colonizes, and that's the lesson as well from the roofs that we saw in Germany from the 19th century. Now, in terms of green roofs and the approach to biodiversity, I think we're only at the beginning of a journey now, and there's a lot of possibilities. Intensive green roofs, roof gardens, can be also extremely biodiverse. They shouldn't be excluded, and I think we can take wildlife gardening principles, and there's a lot of information about wildlife gardening available, and apply those to intensive green roofs. So we can even, because we don't have the the constraints that you have on lightweight extensive green roofs, we can even start making ponds and trees and doing some very interesting things. And I know that from the work that's being done in Japan on some of the neglected roof gardens there, you can see that intensive green roofs also have a lot of potential to create wildlife habitats and benefit wildlife. But we'll turn back to extensive green roofs because we know in reality there's a lot of potential for biodiversity there. And what really I see as the main approach here, and this is a phytosociological approach, is that what we're creating are arrested pioneer communities. In other words, there is the succession process, which does carry on, as Christine has demonstrated, is arrested. These old roofs, they don't become scrub and woodland, which is the classical progression. They stay as grasslands. They're stressed because they dry out and because they have shallow soil. So that's something that we need to work within. Now, to go back to the German experience, the lesson here, I think, is that yes, we know what happens in the long run, but also there's a lesson here that we need to be more patient. I know that many of the owners of buildings do not have patience, but I think that the more sophisticated owners and clients will be able to see this kind of example, and they can understand that we're not in a hurry. Actually, we know that eventually we're going to have an arrested pioneer community of lichens and mosses, grasses and so on. We can predict what those are. We can even, if you like, direct what happens to a certain extent. But people need to relax and possibly learn from these 100-year-old roofs. Now, in terms of the approach to to creating a biodiverse green roof, I want to echo the comments that Dusty made earlier, that this is not really a building product, it's a landscape, and so we need to apply some of the thinking which has been developed by more sophisticated landscape architects to understand the setting, the bioregion, the climate and the microclimate before you even begin thinking about what you're trying to do. And what are the local priorities for conservation? You heard Nathalie talking about some of the wading birds that will nest on roofs. Are they in your area or not? Are there other birds that might move in? What about the connections, the connectivity? People say that green roofs can be a series of stepping stones. Is your green roof an important stepping stone? Is it part of a wider network? It needs to be multifunctional. So one of the mistakes that people have made is to think only of biodiversity and not of some of the other functions like evaporative cooling. We've heard about the lessons learned in Switzerland on rare invertebrates, so we know that that will work in virtually all situations. There are a lot of rare invertebrates that we have the potential to help. Substrate depth and variation, Dusty's going to be talking about, and we need to match the planting and seeding and the substrate to the local situation and work with ecologists and horticulturalists and green roof experts as well. So we mustn't think that we have all the answers. We can learn from practical people. And of course we can look at reference communities, which goes back to the phytosociological approach, not only in terms of what Christine is describing on green roofs, but also in terms of what phytosociologists have described in the local area. So by getting all this information, we can start to think about what's going to happen. And of course, sometimes it's very obvious what kind of green roof you should have. This is in Scotland on the coast. You can see all around you what you need to do there. That matches easily. But in an urban situation, it's not always clear what is the reference here. This is a river, but it's not a river. There's no terrestrial habitat nearby to take your reference from. So this may need some creative thinking, but on the other hand, ecological imperatives like biodiversity action plans and target species, and also knowledge of other extensive green roofs in this city, this is in London, will help you to devise the right thing for that area. And you know, this kind of approach, biodiverse, different substrate depth, native species in natural associations, this is a practical approach which is being used in London. This is a green roof consultancy project which Dusty has worked on. So that's very clear to me. I think we've got a lot of information on how to create extensive dry green roofs, arrested pioneer communities. But I just want to quickly finish on a couple of important issues for the future. Now, there's a lot of interest in recycling grey water in cities because it gets wasted, it's sent into the sewers, but actually it should be cleaned and reused. And this throws open the likelihood that roofs will become places where grey water is recycled. And the obvious thing about that is that you would be creating wetlands on roofs. So again, great potential for biodiversity, and of course it's very useful not only in terms of cleaning and recycling water, but you get huge evapotranspirative cooling and evaporative cooling from this kind of thing. So I think that we're going to be doing a lot of wetland roofs as well in the future, and I know that Christine and her colleagues have looked at this in places like Vancouver. And then finally, we're all, those of us that know that you can combine photovoltaics and green roofs are always frustrated to hear that, you know, there's often a problem with this. Roofs should be either green or should have PVs. But my point about this is we can go a lot further than putting frames on roofs, A-frames. I predict that in the future we can, if you like, create a forest effect so that the canopy of the forest is created by the PVs, and there's a lot of new products that are actually like leaves. And so what you have, if you can imagine inside a real forest, are shade-loving plants growing on the forest floor. So I can imagine a biodiverse green roof which has a canopy of PVs and then an understory on if you like, trees or steel posts or whatever they might be, or on nets across the green roof, and then underneath you have shade-loving woodland plants. So here's another direction that I think people should be looking in, because this works and it's fine, what you see in the picture there, but we can be a lot more creative than that. And we may even get more electricity from a multi-storied canopy of PVs, and we may get some very interesting habitats as well. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Nice, thanks, Gary. I like your vision of the future. Thank you for that.
Can I dive in? Can I dive in?
Please do, Dusty. We're just waiting for you. We're just waiting for you.
Yeah.
I know. Well, Nathalie, you can join in this one, Nathalie, because actually, I'll just go to the wetland this year, because what's interesting, Gary and I know Nathalie will know, there's a few roofs in Switzerland where technically they are not very well designed roofs because they're holding lots of water. I'm particularly thinking of St Gallen Hospital, and over the years they've developed into these sort of almost wet grasslands which are fantastic in terms of their orchids. But if they had been designed properly by roofers, right, those orchids probably wouldn't exist, because the water would have been made to get off the roof as quick as possible.
That's
so the point is that actually sometimes mistakes technically can actually give us this fantastic result in 20 years' time. I think you know the roof I mean, Nathalie. Gary and I went there last year.
Yeah, I want to join in this this statement of Dusty, and also about wetlands. I think that's really an interesting point, which I really I'm really looking forward to do more in that topic. Either is it just without putting a special membrane, a pond layer in it, which could be done, which we did with the ground nesting birds in a small, like a small pond, in order that they get water, but we just plant it around it with typical water lamp plants. So you can, of course, you can do it in some aesthetic way, but I think there are many various ways to do it, and I think it's really important to go on with this kind of wetlands on roofs, or just part of it. So we have some roofs in Switzerland, even just made really aesthetically for that purpose, and I think it's really the people are really really like it very much to see it also, but it's really good for biodiversity, and again it brings you other flowers and insects. And to finish that, what is really interesting, again, I really want to support your statement, Gary, about PVs and green roofs. I always, when I just travel around Switzerland or France and I have presentation, the people just say, well, we just put on PVs, it's fine, you know. And I said, and is it greens down there on the PVs? No, it's enough, just do PVs. And I think it's, I just always say there is not an either or, it's a and. You just put PVs and you green it, you know, because the efficiency of the PVs, that's a thing you didn't say now, but I think you just know about it. It's just it's supported because you have evapotranspiration, and so the efficiency of the panels is higher than if you would just put it on a gravelled roof or on a bitumen roof, whatever. So I think this is another point. But your idea of canopy and forest plants under the panels is brilliant. I really love that. And it's, of course, it's absolutely correct. You can plant other plants under the panels than you would be able to do it otherwise on roofs. And it's a big opportunity. To have shade on a roof is brilliant.
And, you know, the lesson from all of this is multifunctionality.
I mean, Christian, can I join in on that one?
We need to embrace the idea of multifunctionality, so that we're not fighting our colleagues. We're not fighting our colleagues. We're working with our colleagues. If they want electricity, we can let them make electricity. If they want to clean water, we can help them to clean water. If they want to keep the building cool, we can help them to increase that. So instead of separating all these functions on different roofs, of course, if we're given a roof to only think about biodiversity, we can. That's not a problem. But if we need to share these functions, we should be willing to do that.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I always say it's combined. Sure, it's really combined.
This is yeah. This is a great vision that, you know, Gary and I work together. There's a great vision. Is that we're only really touching on the potential of air conditioning units, photovoltaics. You know, how can we work with mechanical engineers and structure engineers to make these sort of complex buildings, but which actually deliver really good green roofs for nature conservation, for all the benefits. Biodiversity is often been seen as a bunch of, you know, the ecologists. They don't do the really hardcore sort of engineering stuff, but if we can be included in that process, we'll probably actually make better roofs in the long run in the future.
Yeah.
Okay, that was great. Thanks for that, Gary, and for the nice discussion, everyone. Now our last speaker on the panel is Dusty Gedge. Dusty, you're going to talk to us about your work designing and promoting green roofs for diversity for over 10 years in London. Go to it.
Yeah, hopefully this sort of draw everything together, because my work has been very much involved in the work in Switzerland, and of course I work very closely with Gary, who I've known for over 12 years. This is a picture I took the other day. I just put it in because this is where I'm at, where we're at now in London in terms of designing roofs. But it's been quite a long journey, because back in '97, when I first got involved, a bit like Gary, I didn't really know anything much about green roofs. It's just happens to be St Paul's, and it's a big bank, sorry, a big legal firm, and you'll find most of the big buildings in London now will have to have green roofs, and most of them will have some condition that they should be designed for biodiversity, which is a great success, if I may say. However, when I first got involved in this, at the time there were very generic systems, and they were very thin and lightweight. And to be honest, there was a group of us in London who sort of started to promote what we would have called brown roofs, which I'm one of the guys who came up with that term. And this is the original rubble roof in Deptford, the Laban Dance Centre, which is just rubble from the site put up on the roof. And I know from research in Canada, this is probably one of the most carbon-free in terms of its imported energy, because most of the substrate came from literally within 10 metres, 20 foot of the building itself. However, we made a lot of mistakes, and I think it's sometimes good to say you can make mistakes. The idea of this roof was that it would self-colonise. It's great ecologically, but actually a lot of the plants you want on a roof won't make them. And if I'm right, I think I'm right, knowing Stefan, the original green roofs back in the 90s in Switzerland were often roofs that were meant to self-colonise, and certainly Dr. Bruneisen's work changed that. Why biodiversity? We're a bit fortunate in the UK, because over the last 10 years we've had these biodiversity action plans, which have, they're not legally binding, but they've become a sort of almost a moral way of getting biodiversity onto buildings. So you have these action plans. Our brownfields in the UK are like brownfields in continental Europe. They're not necessarily contaminated, but certainly in the part of the UK I am, and elsewhere actually in the UK, even in Scotland, these places become very, very, very important for rare bugs and invertebrates, and serve high conservation of high conservation value. But when you want to put up rubble on a roof in a city where it's all very, very high end and everybody wants to design everything perfect, it's got to look beautiful, it's been a bit of a tension, because generally green roofs back in 97, 2000, I would call them horticulturally driven. They were driven to provide something which looked beautiful immediately, and one size fits all, which is kind of against ecological principles. And my association was through this bird, which happens to like nesting on, urban wastelands, or vacant lots. Not necessarily very, very beautiful, but because it's protected, we were able to use its protected status to get a lot of green roofs put up. So with my collaboration with Dr. Bruneisen in Switzerland, we managed to come up with some basic principles, and they've been referred to, Natalie's been referred to them, Christine and Gary. It's topographical variety. So we've got 150 mil, which is 6 inches, going down to 50 mil. And what is that basically says in terms of biodiversity is if you've got spiders that like webs, they can be up in the 6 inches or the 150 mil. If you like spiders that like hunting around in stones, they're down in the 50 mil. So topographical variety creates this interesting biodiversity in terms of invertebrates, and I would still argue that focusing on invertebrates can actually help you create better green roofs. The other thing I thought I'd bring up here is I'm not a fully trained ecologist. I mean, Gary is one of the issues over the last 13 years is ecologists putting up using the same principles at ground level on roofs. But you have to understand a roof. So there's a classic example of a chalk grassland, which is not a chalk grassland down in Kent, which is in southeast England, which is brown grassland, because it's got no drainage and it's on a roof, and it's been created exactly the same way as they did it at ground level, but we're actually on a roof. So we're talking about replicating characteristics, not restoring. And I think it's a very, very important point when we do green roofs. It's not saying that you can't do interesting landscapes, and that's what I'm interested in, but you've got to think about replicating the principles, not restoring. There we go. And this is the chalk grassland roof, you can see the picture there. Where I took the picture from is perfect, highly protected chalk grassland, very, very flower rich. But this roof is not, because it's essentially chalk soil and no free drainage on it. But this is a calcareous grassland on Zurich tram station, which replicates many of the circumstances of that kind of grassland that those people wanted to replicate. So these are my basic principles, principles that Nathalie's talked about and Gary's talked about and Christine. But I think it's very, very important for people to recognise that there is a tension. There's a tension in the built environment, and there's a tension between built environment and biodiversity. Its nature wants one thing. We want to go and buy a product which solves our biodiversity problem. But biodiversity is heterogeneous, it's not homogeneous. So, you know, my belief, and it's not that each roof needs to be designed, but a roof needs to be considered from an ecological perspective, not from buying a product. And when we managed to write the policy for London, we wrote some guidance, which was each roof should have a minimum depth of 80 mil and a maximum depth of 150 mil. So that's about 3.5 inches to 6 inches. Well, now nearly every roof that goes up in London is always 3.5 inches, because that's the way they do it. And if I could go back and rewrite that, I would. I'd say it should have an average depth of 130 mil, which would be about 5.25 inches. So you can sometimes actually write something wrong with all good intentions. It's interesting to look at the Laban roof. Now, it was installed in 2000. This is it this year. We had a drought for 3 months between February and May, and the power of nature to regenerate itself. This roof was virtually dead in May, and now it's really alive and it's functioning perfectly. And I think we can learn a lot from green roofs about actually how ecosystems perform when they're highly stressed, which they are on a roof. So I'm getting to the end of it. I mean, I've done a lot of things with green roofs, not just about biodiversity. It's been my interest. I helped set up three PhDs, but the first one, which was started in 2002, was completed in 2006. Very, very fortunate that Dr. Kalash has continued researching those roofs, and we've added roofs as we've started to learn more about how we should design them. And next year we shall have 12 years of study on green roofs and invertebrate biodiversity, and hopefully we'll have one mammoth paper. But I'm very interested in actually what we've learned in terms of how the climate changes year on year and how the roofs have changed year on year. And as I said, varied topography issues. I'm not a native. I start from a native perspective. Certainly, intuitively, I've found that on very stressed roofs that sedums will help the wildflowers grow, and age is a factor in terms of allowing the ecosystem to establish. And I just want to say one thing, is when I first went to Switzerland, I went to Switzerland because people said there's no research on green roofs and biodiversity. This is 1999. Sometimes the lack of research can stop us doing things. We can be intuitive, we can act, we can build roofs without the research to back it up, and we discover. Our PhD we set up in the UK found exactly the same results that Dr. Benoison found too. So get the roofs up, we can start researching them afterwards. Thank you very much.
Nice. Thanks, Dusty. Did anyone want to comment on Dusty's points?
Well, I can say something. I say thank you to Dusty, and well, I really know since many years the work you're doing in the UK and London, and I know, of course, that we helped you somehow. Well, I would say Dr. Stefan Brenneisen in Switzerland. But I want to say that following up what you were doing now last years, I must say you did good work, and you did now your own work, which is really interesting for me, to see what kind of roofs you're building up, what kind of research you're doing. So now I think it's really, now we are at the point where it's a interesting and a good exchange, and I also can say we can learn from you now.
Dusty, could I say something? Hello? Yeah, I just wanted to say that, of course,
yeah, of course you can, mate.
London and Switzerland and certain parts of the United States have a temperate climate. So we can learn from each other in those climates. But of course, people are now looking to create green roofs in Mediterranean climates, in deserts, in continental climates which have extreme cold and so on. And every time I'm approached by somebody from one of these climates, the first thing they say is, we don't think it's possible to create a biodiverse green roof in our country. And we're starting to realize that by applying ecological knowledge and looking at the local flora in each of those regions, we will be able to create biodiverse green roofs virtually anywhere. So I would say to people, don't be too put off. Look out of the window. If you can see vegetation in your area, the chances are you can have a biodiverse green roof.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. Thanks for bringing that up, Gary, too. Just that, yeah, the green roof industry has spread to virtually every continent. And there's people around the world who are installing green roofs for a variety of reasons. And I think it's really valid to maybe step away from, as Dusty's been stressing, the product, and maybe get back to basics, which is the potential of applying ecological knowledge, ground-based ecological design, and developing solutions and designs for whatever purposes, but based on our local resources and conditions.
Well
Dusty,
said.
did you want to say something?
Can I add to that, Christine, if I may?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'll do a bit of European Federation here. I mean, certainly from a European Federation point of view, I'm very, very interested in what happens south of the Alps. And certainly in my conversations with Mark Simmons over in Austin, once we get into the hot and dry, you can actually apply the principles in Switzerland and the UK, but you have to take them to that context. And there's some very, very good green roofs going up in Greece. They're not doing it the northern European way. They may be not using the same engineered items, which is very, very controversial, but they've gone and looked at their own mountain flora and how the substrates work. And the trouble is, it goes back to that tension I said to you, is people, when especially new countries get involved, they go, oh, it's a building product, we're going to buy the building product from Germany, if I may say, and we'll apply that in Turkey. Maybe some of those products aren't right in Turkey, and we need to actually go and look at how, in a hot, dry climate, we can create green roof systems that fit that particular climate. But some of the principles that all of us apply are actually probably more informative than some of the engineering approaches, because it's instinctive about how you create ecosystems at roof level. And the biggest problem in the hot and dry is some of the elements beneath the substrates and the plants. And it's highly controversial, but you know, I'll say it.
I think that's really great. Thanks for mentioning that too, Dusty. And I think identifying it as a tension is really valid as well, because in the same way that maybe it's not appropriate in one context, it could be perfectly appropriate, or in a combination effect. So I think identifying it as a tension is really appropriate. Thanks for that. Did anyone else have any comments?
And also, if I may say, Christine, there's some great people. I know they're talking another... One more,
Hello.
Some of the work being done in Florida by Kevin Songa and Metro Verde, he's talking another panel. Some of the stuff being done down in Australia with Ben Nicholson. There's some people out there taking these principles over the last 10 years and they're really applying them to their local area. And I'm celebrating them because it's actually down to individuals who really want to interface with this issue.
Do you think there might be someday in the near future maybe a conference purely for green roofs for biodiversity, for people who are doing ecological research on green roofs? Could be entirely focused on that topic. What say?
Yeah, that would be fabulous.
Well, I'd rather personally that it was a conference. Yeah. I personally would rather it was a conference where biodiversity, a green roof conference, where it can show that you can do all those other things like stormwater and thermal insulation. That biodiversity is the driving force to actually make multifunctional good green roofs, rather than being separated out as a bunch of fluffy ecologists.
Yeah.
Who are you calling fluffy?
Well, you know, we get accused of being the soft thing, you know. There's a very famous person in North America who said, well, you pioneers, you know, where's the greenbacks with biodiversity, Dusty? Where's the greenbacks? You know? But we're teaching, I think the biodiversity world can teach a lot to actually the other professions within this multidisciplinary world.
Definitely. Yeah, and again, I think as we've all kind of touched on.
Go on.
Can I just finish that thought? Yeah. I think what ecologists can also bring to, as you mentioned, like all the different players in the green roof industry, for example, is the philosophy and the science behind ecological thinking, because that it can be so far-reaching and it's so fundamental. So there's that point too.
Not saying
Nathalie, you had
plastic.
a comment? That's right.
I just wanted to say that I think it's good to have a multifunctional congress, something like that, but I think very important would be to turn it that way, that the biodiversity would be somehow the center of it, and then just add it all together to, like, well, do it a holistic thing. Why not, you know? So just not to put all of the rest and just beside we can do some panels with biodiversity. No, it's just to put it in the center and say we do a holistic thing, so everybody has something to say and it's important to say, and it has its importance, you know. So I would say that.
Nice. What about you, Gary? Do you have any comments?
I was just going to say to Dusty, you can get back in your bunk now.
Prison bed.
They let me out for the afternoon.
Yeah. You're a lucky one.
Seriously, can I make one point, Christine?
One more, Dusty. Do it. I like how you ask. Thanks for asking anyway. That's very
I just it's a bit of sort of like it's a bit of etiquette. I know I'm a bit forthright about my opinions, but a bit of etiquette. I'd like to thank, and I'm sure I say this on behalf of Nathalie and Gary and yourself, Christine, for Greenroofs.com inviting us to be able to hold this panel. And I'd like to say thank you to Linda and her team, and thank you, Christine, for organising it. And I'd certainly like to thank the geezers. Sorry, geezers is the wrong word for most of the North Americans, but for the gentlemen in the background, Ronnie and Jimmy, for doing all the hard graft in the background.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, very nice. Thanks for that, Dusty. Thanks everyone for joining the panel. So please join us in a few minutes for the Q&A to follow. Thanks for joining us.